Before I get started, I wanted to recognize Jerry Richter. Thanks, Jerry, for coming down. All the hard questions I'm going to defer to Jerry. We really appreciate Jerry making the trip down from Spokane to help us out here. And also, Lori Williams has been in the back as well, and she's done a phenomenal job of helping us advertise these programs and coordinate these programs and helping arrange the site. So Lori's been just a wonderful asset to have to help us with these programs. So what I want to start with is I want to put the Farm Bill in perspective. And if you remember back when the Farm Bill was being passed and debated, it was being debated back in 2012. There should have been passed in 2012. It was extended into 2013. It missed the 2013 deadline because of this acrimonious political debate that was ongoing at the time. And it was a very bitter debate. There was government shutdowns in 2013. And as a result of the Farm Bill was passed with this very important objective to recognize, and that objective was budget reduction. And so through that budget reduction, they wanted to reduce government payments across the board, including the Farm Bill and Farm Bill spendings, but still maintain a safety net through that, what they developed. And so the results of the programs that you're making decisions on are the result of these multiple objectives of budget reduction and an established farm safety net. Those are the programs that I just wanted to include the abbreviations. But as you mentioned here, it's very critical to recognize that this Farm Bill is built on the success of crop insurance. And so here what we have is the 1980s in here with the farm financial crisis, and subsequent to that farm financial crisis, the dramatic growth in crop insurance use across the country and how effective that's been. And so these programs were designed to build on those crop insurance opportunities. And when you look at the Farm Bill, the only sacred cow now in the Farm Bill is crop insurance. And all the other programs, all the other titles in the Farm Bill were cut in funding except for the crop insurance title that received increased funding primarily through SCO and STAX. Okay, this graph is getting to the shallow losses that Randy referred to, and I think this graph is really important to keep in mind and to put into perspective the magnitude of these PLC and ARC payments. And so let's look at what we have here. Here we have on the vertical axis 0 to 100, that's farm revenue percent. Farm revenue percent. And this brown area is this unprotected risk. This pinkish area is the shallow loss programs that we're making a decision on. And then this big blue area is the protection provided by your crop insurance. And so you really have to recognize that this is the base of your risk management, and that these shallow losses add to it in times of financial stress, either low prices or the combination of low prices, low yields, low revenue. There's no real numbers on this because the size of this unprotected risk and the shallow losses depend on what choices you make. And we'll go through the numbers to illustrate that. Okay, just a critical factor. Remember that the decisions are binding for the life of the Farm Bill. I want to talk about 3 decisions that you have to make: the yield update, the base reallocation decision, and then the program choices, PLC or ARC. Let's first look at the time frame on which you have to make these decisions and who's responsible for the decisions. The yield update is the landowner's responsibility, and it has to be made by February 27th, 2015, at the same time with the reallocation of the base by February 27th, 2015, also the responsibility of the landowner. And then the program choice is multiple choice. If it's leased, then the landowner and the leasee have to come to mutual agreement, and that decision is March 31st. If you have a power of attorney, a lot of people have power of attorney. If you're a leasee, you have power of attorney to execute these government programs, and that's really good. The FSA has a specific form, specific power of attorney form that they have on file for power of attorney on these government programs. And if you have that form, you're golden to make these decisions. If you don't have that form, that's something you want to make a check note that you have the proper delegated power of attorney to make these decisions. That's an important point to keep, to make note of. The second important point to make note of is on these time frames. If you're going to reallocate your base, the decision to reallocate your base is going to be also on your analysis of what those programs you're going to decide on. And so you have to integrate those two decisions. And this February 27th date is coming up pretty quick. And so what we want to leave you with is that we want you to start really thinking and really pushing the numbers on your farm to make these decisions. Okay, so why are the yield and base update decisions so much more important and complicated for Washington as compared to the Midwest corn soybean rotation? So let's look at a few points on that. And so there's been a large change in your crop rotation. We have a much varied crop rotation, and those changes have been implemented over the past few years. And the base acre history has the potential to date back to the 1990s. And so when you consider what you were planting in the 1990s versus what you have now, there's a big change, and so that base has a potential for a large reallocation. Probably here more than anywhere, there's adoption of new production technologies, namely no-till, which is going to have impact on your yields and your cropping patterns. Moving from summer fallow to continuous cropping is a potential. And also on this last point on the potential to dramatically increase your yield. And depending on when, and I'll go through an example, depending on when you planted some of these crops, it's going to be very surprising for people to go through these yield calculations, surprising in that there's some very beneficial yield updates, and surprising that that the yield is decreased. But if the yield decreases, you don't have to update it. It's just only if it's to your benefit to increase it. But that's a big issue. And also, this last point on the large variation in yield across the counties, that is something we are, it's something that's very challenging to look at and to think about on how those yields vary across the county and how it impacts your program decision. And so I'll have a couple slides on the yields and put that into perspective too. Okay, so let's go into the yield update decision. It's on a commodity by commodity basis. The reference point is your summary acreage history report that you received in the summertime, that letter from FSA. So that's the base information that you're making comparisons to. So you're going to have that letter handy. The formula for the yield update is 90% times the simple average yield from 2008 to 2012. You update your yields if that recalculated yields are higher than current yields, and it's by crop for each of your FSA farms. And so here's an example, just putting that through. Here's the yield, here's the yields that this farm had from 2008 to 2012, planted and had a yield each year. Simple average, 90% of that simple average. Here's an example where they didn't plant it, and you might have more than one year where you didn't plant, but if you didn't plant it, the average just drops that year. And so that gets back to the point, if you have crops planted in certain years, that yield may be very beneficial. So if it's not planted, it's dropped. And then here, this green that's not showing up well on this projector is plug yield. And so you won't go below the plug yield. And the decision aids that are available are very well adept at putting in the plug yields. You just have to put in your yields for that. And so they're very capable of handling the yield calculation and giving you that information to compare to your existing yield to update. Okay, so is there any questions on the yield update decision? Okay. Let's move into the base acre decision, base reallocation decision, and this is just to put it into perspective. When I said that there's been a large change in planted acreage, here's the change in the 1990s. I put it back to the 80s to show this drop. But you can see even from the 1990s to this current time that drop in barley acreage that went someplace else, just to illustrate that the acreage has changed in Washington. Again, that base acreage is the comparison is the summary acreage history report in that FSA letter, and there's only two choices. There's been some confusion on this, but there's only two choices. You can either keep your existing base that's given to you on that letter, or you can update and reallocate your base per the formula of your planted acres. So there's only two choices. So let's go through this example. This is an actual farm that's facing this decision on how they're going to reallocate the base on this FSA farm number that I substituted 1, 2, 3, 4 for. Okay, so this farm has wheat, barley, and canola, and this is the existing 2013 base comparison point. 142 acres in wheat, 133.5 acres in barley. And here's the planting history. You can see in 2009 it has 280 acres of planted acres. There's only 275 acres of base, but they planted it to that and more to wheat, and in 2012 wheat and barley. And so what the formula does is it takes the average planted and considered planted acres over 2009 to 2012, calculates that total, calculates the percent of that went to wheat, 92.2, 0% went to barley, and 7.8% went to canola. And so you multiply those percents by your 2013 total base, and so this farm ends up with a potential reallocation base of 254 acres in wheat and 21 acres in canola, and you maintain the base acres. So you maintain the base acres and you just get to reallocate them based on these percents that are calculated. Okay, so let's look at that. Here's their decision, and that's a pretty dramatic decision. You know, you lose all, am I going to lose, is it beneficial to me to lose that barley base or to keep it and really expand my base into wheat? And so on this FSA number, that's the base reallocation decision. And so what you have to do is, are you going to optimize your government payments and try to strategize, is wheat going to pay more than barley? Are you going to try to match your base to future intended plantings if it works out? And some base acre calculations may work out to be that way. Or a third, when you do the calculation, is to diversify your base as much as possible. But that's how the base reallocation decision is made. Okay, so any comments or questions on the base reallocation? Yes, yes, sir.
If you decide not to, why do they have these different bases for different crops? If you don't maintain your barley base, how the hell is that going to come back to bite us?
It would, if
why do they have a barley base if theoretically we can grow whatever we want to grow?
You can grow whatever you want to grow. So let me try to make this clear. So on that barley base, if you chose a program PLC or ARC County, they're going to calculate for your farm, your FSA farm, if you maintain that barley base, what that potential payment for barley would be, even though you don't have to plant it. for those two programs. And so that's why the decision that it might be beneficial to keep that barley base, if you look at the numbers and you think barley is going to make a government payment over the next 5 years or the life of the Farm Bill. So that's why choosing that base is important. And then the ARC-IC program is different, but let's keep that till we show some slides on that. Is that making
Well, you're
sense?
saying maintain a barley base just so you can gamble on a possible market dividend from someplace on high. The
Yeah.
base is basically meaningless, actually, what we're doing.
That, you said it very well. Did everybody hear that? He said that we were talking about maintaining the barley base or not, and he said that the only reason to keep the barley base when there's no barley planted is to gamble on getting a payment in the future on that barley. And that is exactly what your decision is. And here in that farm, they wanted to move more towards canola. They tested growing those canola acres as a test and expect to plant more canola into the future. But the formula is only a very small allocation to canola, and you can't. That's what you have. That's all there is. I mean, that's the decision.
You can't switch 100% to canola. You can't if you want it.
You could plant. You can
Well, you
plant,
can't switch your
but
base.
you cannot switch your base to canola. No, you cannot. It's dictated by the formula.
All right.
Important point. Which puts it into perspective as to why everybody has to analyze that base calculation for their farm.
And Shannon, would you go out on a limb saying that your farm program might be based on base acres instead of planted acres as in the past, because of W2?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's lots of potentials and there's lots of potential impacts, and it's going to be, you know, if you were going to look at buying somebody's farm, what would you look at? One of the things you would look at is what base do they have? And there's some farms that have some really perverse things that happen to base because of CRP, and they lost all their base. And so the impact is in the future as to how that impacts the cash flow of the lands and what impact that's going to have on value.
Shannon,
Yeah.
can you repeat the questions so the guys in the back
Okay.
can do questions?
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Remind me to do that. So we have a microphone here, so some of the questions too. So, but the question was discussing what the future programs, what future impacts might have on your base decision today. And the future impacts are unknown, but saying that when you go to look at somebody's land, if you're going to purchase it or even own it yourself, that base decision is important. Okay. So let's go through the programs, and we'll go from PLC to ARC.
Whatever program.
So let's start with PLC. Okay, so let's look at what the formula is. Randy well mentioned that it's a price loss triggered program, and it supplements revenue. Price loss trigger supplements revenue, and the payment formula is the reference price. Here's a table of the reference prices that are fixed for the life of the Farm Bill. And the reference price minus the market year average price. So the market year average price has to fall below the reference price in order to trigger a payment. And that's multiplied by the farm's yield. I called it CC yield, but I think the proper nomenclature when it changes to PLC yield, but it's the yield that you update to through this program when you sign up by February 27th. But anyway, it's a farm yield. And so I think that's important to recognize, is that there's some variance between farms based on this yield between the programs based on your farm yields. And then it's multiplied by the base acres times 85%. So you get paid on 85% of your base for that commodity. Okay, here's a table, something to look at, and so here's the reference price. These yellow boxes are where the market year average price was below the reference price, so you don't see too many yellow boxes. Some in the 2009-2010 marketing year, some in the 2010 and 11 marketing year, but none recent. And this is a USDA NAS projection of projected prices, and on their projected for 14-15, only canola is projected to be below the reference price. But you can see their reference price projections in that last column. And then that URL is where you can go to look at that further if you wanted to. Okay, so when they designed the reference prices, the guys that wrote the program, they were looking at this, and remember the budget reduction objective. Some might argue that these reference prices are too low, but they are what they are, and they're in law, and that's what we're going to be dealing with. Okay. With PLC, just a few comments on SEO supplemental coverage option as a potential program option to lay on top PLC. So I'll give you a few slides on that. ARC is not eligible for SEO. You have to choose PLC to use SEO. The federal government pays 65% of the premium on SEO. Importantly, your level of SEO coverage is chosen annually. So that's an important point to remind yourselves that although the program choice is for the life of the Farm Bill, your SEO coverage level is chosen annually when you sign up for your RMA crop insurance program. Okay. And it follows the coverage of your underlying crop insurance, yield protection, revenue protection, or revenue protection with your harvest price exclusion. This is very important to recognize the difference in the trigger. SEO differs from your crop insurance on how the loss is triggered. Your insurance isn't triggered by your individual farm. SEO is triggered by the county level yield loss. Okay, so that's important. Does not provide prevented planting benefits. For Washington, we have barley and wheat. And since you're not doing barley, it's just really applied to wheat. Okay.
On the SEO, then, if your level of coverage goes up like 60, 70 to 80, doesn't your subsidized ratio go down?
The subsidy stays the same, but your price,
They pay less.
your premium goes up. The subsidy stays the same.
Government subsidy at 65%.
Yeah.
The premium.
The premium adjusts. And so let's look at some comparisons here. Washington has up to 85% coverage option. The Washington average revenue coverage is 82%. So for Washington, it's working very effective, very high level of coverage. It's been very beneficial to producers, and producers have responded and have used crop insurance greatly. Now SEO, this first bullet point is really important. It was designed for counties that were less than 85% coverage. They wanted to fill that gap. So because we have 85%, does it affect Washington? Well, it really wasn't designed for us, but there's a potential maybe for somebody to take advantage of it and to think about it. And so what you're doing is you have the potential to offset your cost savings by the higher subsidy against that county risk profile over time. And I would encourage everybody who's considering SEO that to first evaluate your financial capacity to withstand the loss if it doesn't trigger on your farm relative to the county. So you have to have financial capacity to withstand that loss. And it's a derivative type insurance, meaning that it's that risk profile is based on the county and not your farm. The last thing I'll say on SEO is that there's an RMA website where you can go and look at those premiums through this website for your county. Okay. Any questions or comments on SEO? Yes, sir.
SEO only applies to the elected PLC.
The question was, does SEO only apply to PLC? And that is correct. That is absolutely correct, and they came out with another news release yesterday specifying that. There is some confusion because your crop insurance tracks might differ than your FSA numbers. And that's a confusing aspect, but the SEO boils down to the FSA track and having PLC on that track. There was, what was it, 29 people in Washington signed up for SEO on winter wheat.
Because they don't understand.
Okay. Any other questions on PLC or SEO? Okay, now let's move into the Ark County program, and let's take a minute to look at this revenue or the formulas that they're using on Ark County. So again, that's 85% of the base acres, same as PLC. And then the county benchmark revenue guarantee minus the actual county revenue. Okay, so the county benchmark revenue guarantee is 86%. And so if you remember back to that brown area on that bar chart of unprotected risk, here you have 14% additional unprotected risk because of this formula. 86%. And so it's 86% times your 5-year Olympic average of county yield times the Olympic average of price per acre per crop, and it's recalculated annually. The actual county revenue is the market year average price times the county yield per acre. I should mention that it's market year average or the national loan rate, but nobody wants to say national loan rate because those numbers are so low. But for definition, it could be the lower of the two, or it could be the higher of the two. But anyway, let's just keep it with market year average price for now, and that's how that's calculated. It's capped at 10% of your county benchmark revenue. Okay, so this slide is important. This URL, if you have farms in other counties, you can go to this. You can go to this website to get the other counties' yields. But these are the yields each year that applies to that Olympic average for Ark County. And so these yields in Walla Walla County also applies to your farm, and looking at your yield variability of your farm to these numbers. And so this slide is important for you to look at for that yield variability and that yield magnitude. Okay. This is where we'll be tomorrow, so I'll just, nothing to say about that. Here, this is just a URL that I wanted to put up. We're trying to limit the decision aids to the University of Illinois or Texas A&M tools. But this is one of the better, simpler tools from the University of Illinois if you just want to look at Ark County and price loss coverage in a very simplistic format. And so that's what that URL is. And these slides are on the Small Farms Grains website that Randy mentioned and Aaron's going to mention again, so you can get these URLs directly and these presentations as well. Okay, so now let's move to Ark Individual Choice. Ark Individual Choice, the background on that was Senator Baucus in Montana was really the political driving force to get ARC IC introduced into the Farm Bill to account for the wide variation in yields across counties. So let's look at how that works. And so, again, the benchmark revenue is 86%, same as ARC County, but the Olympic average changes. The Olympic average of annual farm revenue, weighted by the acres planted to your covered commodities per acre and recalculated annually. And then that's the benchmark revenue. Your actual farm revenue is again weighted to the crops that you plant, and the market year average price, and your actual farm yield. You still have the benchmark cap at 10%, and it requires you to annually report your yields. You have to report your acreages anyway, but this you have to report your yields so they can get your yields to make the calculations. So the couple points on ARC IC. Farms with highly variable yields may find ARC IC could generate a payment when ARC County does not generate a payment. Farms that produce fruits and vegetables may find ARC IC beneficial because ARC County and PLC payments are reduced if fruits and vegetables are planted on more than 15% of your base acres. For ARC IC, that limit increases to 35%. So some of you in this area, that might be effective. Okay, let's start comparing a few of these program options. Importantly, all program options use the market year average price in their calculation. So the price is the same, and so the underlying price risk is the same. It's just a matter of how the program uses that price. So that's one factor that's consistent across the three programs. ARC County and PLC do not require planting the covered commodities, which builds on what this gentleman's question was on the barley. You do not require planting of the covered commodity, but ARC IC does. It's weighted by the covered commodity plantings. And importantly, this last point, ARC IC combines all farms that are designated ARC IC farms together in their weightings. And so that's geographical diversification across the farms. They did that to the benefit of the government's farm bill to reduce their risk. Because they expect to have one farm might be lower and one farm might be better. And they offset that risk through that weighting. Okay. Importantly, ARC County and PLC pay on 85% of your base, and ARC IC pays on 65% of your base. Okay, and so this point here, I did a few rough calculations, and your yields, to maintain the magnitude of the payment, your yields have to be about 30% greater than the county to offset the 20% loss in base acreage coverage. So originally when I went into that, I was thinking, well, let's see what 20% yield difference was, and well, that's not enough. It's 30% or more, about 30% or a little bit more. So keep that in mind when you're looking at your yields versus that table. But magnitude's not the only thing that you need to consider. You also have to consider frequency of payment. And I'll get to the frequency of payment in the next slide. This slide, so let's look at what happens on the Olympic average calculation. So if you remember, what's ARC County's Olympic average calculation? ARC County's Olympic average calculation is Olympic average of price, Olympic average of yield, and then you multiply that together to get revenue. And ARC IC, it's Olympic average of revenue. And that results in different numbers. And so I wanted to go through and see, God, why did they do that? That's just the confusing aspect that creates a difference, and what's that difference going to be? Well, for Walla Walla County for wheat, just using the county averages, doing the Olympic average on these first two lines is Olympic average of price, Olympic average of yield, and that revenue is $523.86. The Olympic average of revenue is $515, and so for Walla Walla, ARC IC is lower by $8.84 in this example, in this case. In Lincoln County tomorrow, the same calculation is $13.54 positive. So I wanted to see if there's any systematic recommendations to be made on that. And the only thing that I can say that I want you to be aware of is that the calculation is different, and you have to use the decision aids to really get the weighting and to get what exactly this is calculated. But it's a difference, and it's just a difference we have to work with.
Shannon, I don't know if it's been mentioned yet before, but isn't it true those aren't your average prices cannot drop below the reference price of 550? I don't know if that's
They can't drop below the national loan rate. The national loan rate is different than the reference price.
What was the question, Janet?
Okay, the question was, can the market year average price drop below the reference price? But that's how it's triggered. The market year average price has to drop for PLC. It has to drop.
I understand it, but
Yeah.
for our county, I was under the impression that you plug in 550 so yours lower than that.
No, that's not the examples that I know of. It's the market year average price. The floor is the national loan rate. Can't drop below the national loan rate. So there's a bottom price floor of that, but that's like 370, I think, 3 something. So so the question is, on the market year average price, you do have that risk with.
You're right.
Yeah, I'm right on
I think he's right on that, so you might double check that. So.
Okay. I'll check.
He's always right.
that. It was
Okay.
against me.
Okay. Okay. So I wanted to put a table together that compared I want to know something. I want to compare them on one sheet of paper and look at what those advantages are. And so I did this, and I apologize in the back of the room. You probably won't be able to see it, but we can get that to you, and we'll put it on the internet at that Small Grains website. And so the payment ceiling is one thing that goes across. The payment ceiling is $125,000 for PLC, or it's $125,000 or 10% of the benchmark revenue. And the 125%, importantly, is per Social Security number associated with the farm. So husband and spouse would be 2, partnerships would be more. But there is a payment ceiling that identifies that payment revenue. The price risk is, I'll check, but market year average or the national loan rate. The yield that goes across is farm PLC yield, county yield, or your weighted actual farm yield. Payment acres, as we talked about, 85% versus 65%. And then here's the triggers that we talked about. So for a low price outlook, if you have a very pessimistic low price outlook, clearly favors PLC. If you have a farm yield below your county average, if your yields are below the county average, that's going to favor our county because you're going to be paid on a higher yield on your base acres. So that's kind of a point to keep in mind too. And you can look at your yield, those tables of yields, to separate that out. If your farm yields are above average, then PLC payment is triggered. And if they're above average, they have to be well above average on ARC IC to offset the magnitude. But if your yield variability is greater than the county, then that's an important point to look at too. because the county may not trigger because their yield variability is relatively stable. And you might have a piece of property, or an FSA number that has very high variability. And certainly some places with with variable rainfall are going to have some high variability, and they might not get the magnitude back, but their frequency might improve. So that's something to figure with ARC-IC. If your variability is low, if you have an irrigated piece of property and you're not moisture stressed, then that yield variability is low, and that it's not likely to trigger a payment on that FSA number for ARC-IC. Yes?
Yeah, you made the statement in a lighter yielding area in the county where the potential is for a greater payment, but that's only if the county trips. Correct? So if you were in the lighter end, you could have a disaster. I mean, the whole idea is that you're in less precip.
Yep.
You might have potential for a more payment, but you have to wait for the entire county to trigger.
But I think you said two things. If you're in Arc County,
Right.
and you're low yield,
Yes.
it won't trigger for you. So has everybody heard that in the back, talking about Arc County and yield variability and having a low yield? Okay, so if your yield is low and if you have a disaster or a low yield in that farm,
Low precip, say.
yeah, low precip, you're going to have to rely on your underlying crop insurance. Okay, you have to rely on your underlying crop insurance, but you may not. The county does need to trigger, just like you were saying, for you to get a payment. You may not get a payment on our county because the county doesn't trigger.
Right. I was going back to your statement of the potential is there for us to get more in that low precip, but only if the county triggers.
It's only under this ARC-IC.
Yeah, that's an important part to the continuation of the story.
Yeah, only if under ARC-IC. Under ARC-IC, that farm that you described has highly variable yields with low precip or high precip, and that individual track may trigger more often under ARC-IC. And it has absolutely nothing to trigger on the county. It's disjoint, it's totally separate. It's only going to trigger on your farm in that case, weighted for everything that you have under ARC-IC.
But our county can make a payment if the yield stayed the same in the county, and you have the price drop.
And right, it's a revenue trigger, and so it's price, combination of price. So the question was, comment was that Arc County could trigger based on price. Right. So it's a revenue and can be both. Okay.
But to get clear though, the payment on ARC-IC, you don't have to have a disaster, below on the county. What the county does, it doesn't have to be below the yield, does it, for you to get a payment on the ARC-IC? Below the
Repeat that. I was thinking.
Well, he was trying to say that you have to have a countywide disaster to get a payment on the ARC-IC.
Yeah.
That's not the case.
That's not the case. You do not. The county can be stable, and ARC-IC can trigger. Okay, Lori.
Well, I have a question. I was under the impression that we could sub in the county T yield or percentage of the county T for a lower yield.
It will. It won't go. It won't drop below the T yield on the yield calculation. You're absolutely
right. So for a lower yielding farm, that essentially gives you a much higher guarantee versus the county.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's different.
Okay, any other comments or questions on comparing Arc County and ARC-IC or PLC? No. Yeah.
Try to simplify the process and tell me if I'm right or wrong, but basically, if you were gonna go Arc County, you need to know your county average. And if you opted, maybe I wanna go to IC as a better farmer, to summarize it, you better be able to beat your county average by 30%, or the IC is not gonna work for you. Is that a simple way to put it?
There's two things on that I need to make clear. Yeah, you need to have higher yields to offset the magnitude, but you might, yeah, by about 30%. Yeah, 30% of the average, right. But just having high yields may not trigger. If say you have an irrigated tract, your yields are going to be high, but your yield variability is going to be low. And so the only way that it would trigger, as Steve mentioned, would be price. And so you have to put that into how you're evaluating the crop.
So once you figure that out, then you got to determine 65% versus 85% coverage against the two.
You're absolutely right.
Another
Yeah.
variable.
Yeah. And so the decision aid that Aaron's going to present allows you to put those yields in and to do some analysis on that.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Okay. So we'll keep going. We're essentially done with my part. So this slide just an important point that I wanted to emphasize on this slide is that you have the option across your FSA farm numbers to mix and match those programs. And so here's just three farm numbers, landowner, and he's leasing this piece here. And it's just, these are just wheat and barley crops in it. And so just to make it perfectly clear, you could choose wheat PLC and barley Arc County on this, or wheat Arc County or barley PLC on this farm, or put both in Arc County or both into PLC. So you can mix and match those PLC and Arc County. Or you could put all the farm into Arc IC. And you can put, so the important point to note is you could put all the farm into Arc IC in here, in this FSA farm number, and still in this FSA farm number, put it in wheat PLC or Arc County. Is that clear? That's an important thing to take home.
So, if you have 4 or 5 farms and you put 2 of them in Arc IC and the rest in Arc County or PLC, when you mix them together, the only ones you average are the Arc IC farms. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's an important point. So if you put this farm in Arc IC and this farm in Arc IC, then they're weighted average together.
And one of the other things on Arc IC, if you want to put this farm in Arc IC and this farm under Arc IC, as a farmer, your average is coming between these two farmers, or between these two farms. The leasee, the landowner, his average is going to come off of this farm only. And so it may be that your landlord could be getting a payment, or his payment is going to be different than your payment here between the two. So that's an important part, is yours is coming between these two. The landowner is coming off of this farm here only.
So these are just some summary points. There's my contact information. And there's the Small Greens website. So any other comments or questions? Okay, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna let you take a short break, and then Aaron's gonna come back.
We have to participate.